Mafia. He left the gang, but couldn't escape. Part 2. Giovanni left the restaurant feeling lighter than he had in years. Deciding to take a walk around the lake, he took in the beautiful scenery, watching the waves gently lap at the shore, while the sun set over the horizon. Memories of his old life crept in, pulling at his heartstrings. Despite the summer night, a chill wind swept through the trees, rustling their leaves into a mournful sound. It felt like the forest itself was mourning, and Giovanni found himself enveloped in its melancholic embrace. The quiet lapping of the waves now sounded like gunshots. Then his mother, her gentle eyes filled with worry during the last few months of her life. Giovanni scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had known this might happen, yet he hadn't expected it to come so soon. And then there was Sofia, the girl he could have saved, the innocent caught in the crossfire of his world. The mention of his family sent a jolt of fear through Giovanni. Enzo knew where his weak spot lay, and he wasn't afraid to use it against him. "What are you doing here?" Enzo shrugged, taking a long drag from his cigarette, just making sure you weren't planning on skipping town, leaving us holding the bag. He flicked his cigarette into the grass, and it landed on a dry leaf, sending up a small plume of smoke. It was Enzo, one of the men from the restaurant, the very man who had offered Giovanni a chance to leave the gang without any harm coming to him. But for Giovanni, the darkness had only just begun. Packing a small bag with essential documents and a few changes of clothes, he left behind the life he'd always known, the life that had become a prison of fear and violence. As the chilling words of Enzo's warning echoed in his mind, he knew he couldn't stay in the city. The faces of his family, his father, his mother, his sister, flashed through his mind, fueling his determination to protect them. The fear of what they might do to his family kept him constantly on edge. He had to get out, disappear if he wanted to protect his family. Everywhere he went, he saw reminders of the life he'd left behind, the faces of people he'd once considered friends, the places where he'd committed acts he could never undo. Enzo's eyes narrowed, his gaze boring into Giovanni like a physical force. He demanded results, threatened more violence unless his men came back with news of Giovanni's whereabouts. Regret and guilt washed over him, threatening to drown him in their icy grip. He knew the risks, knew that he might be walking into a trap, but he was willing to take that risk. For his family, for his soul, he was ready to face Enzo and put an end to this violent chapter of his life once and for all. He had to face it, confront the demons that still clung to him like a shroud. With a mix of raw emotion and quiet intensity, Giovanni revealed the depth of his character, showcasing a strength that transcended physical prowess. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to get as far away from Enzo's reach as possible. Will Giovanni emerge victorious, or will Enzo's sinister plans prevail? Find out next week in Part 3. He knew Enzo would do something terrible to protect the business, but he had prayed that his rival's ruthlessness wouldn't extend to his own family. With a heavy heart and a determined gaze, Giovanni confronted his tormentor, ready to sacrifice everything to protect those he loved. In a shocking turn of events, Giovanni's inner strength proved to be his greatest weapon. The threat hung in the air between them, heavy and menacing, like a storm cloud on the horizon. Each ripple on the water's surface became a face from his past, some friendly, some menacing. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to feel at peace. "You're not one of us anymore, Giovanni, and we don't want you to think you can just walk away." They scoured every street corner, interrogated every associate, desperate to find their elusive target. "You're still in this family, whether you like it or not, and if you try to leave, we'll make sure you regret it." He had seen the things Enzo's men did to rivals, to anyone who got in their way. They were monsters, devoid of empathy, capable of unimaginable acts of violence. "You really think we wouldn't touch your little sister if you crossed us? You know what this family is capable of?" The weight of his past was still there, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like it was crushing him. But as the night wore on, the shadows grew longer, and the serenity of the scene began to feel a little too empty. He stopped by a park bench and sank into the cold, hard wood. As the darkness deepened, so did his thoughts. He thought of his father, a good man who never deserved what happened to him. Suddenly, a twig snapped nearby, jolting him out of his thoughts. His instincts, honed by years of living in the shadows, took over. He spun around, his senses on high alert. A pair of eyes glinted at him from the bushes. Startled, Giovanni scrambled back, knocking over the bench in his haste to get away. But it was too late. A low chuckle echoed in the darkness, and a familiar figure emerged from the trees, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Enjoying your evening stroll, Giovanni?" Enzo asked, his voice raspy and laced with amusement. "Enzo," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere," Giovanni said, trying to project confidence. But his knees were shaking, betraying his true feelings. "Are you sure about that? Because if you leave, it's not just you we'll be worried about. Your family, too." "You wouldn't dare," Giovanni said, his voice tight. "Wouldn't dare? What?" Enzo taunted, stepping closer. Giovanni felt his blood run cold. "Let me make something clear," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a low growl. With those chilling words, Enzo turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Giovanni trembling in the growing gloom. Hours later, the rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, chasing away the shadows of the night. He called a friend from the restaurant, someone he trusted, and told him to drive him out of the city. As the car sped away from the city, the familiar streets blurring into a tunnel of asphalt and glass, Giovanni felt a mix of relief and terror gripping his heart. The journey was long and fraught with tension, every mile marker a reminder of how little time he had left to outrun his past. Days turned into weeks as Giovanni moved from one temporary hideout to another, always looking over his shoulder, always half expecting Enzo's men to be closing in on him. He tried to rebuild his life, get a job, make new friends, but the weight of his past was a heavy burden to bear. The scars of his past ran deep, and Giovanni found himself haunted by nightmares. Each dream a replay of past violence, each nightmare a reminder of the darkness that still lingered within him. Meanwhile, back in the city, Enzo's men were working tirelessly to track down Giovanni. Enzo himself was a whirlwind of fury, his rage growing with each passing day. As the net tightened around Giovanni, he knew he couldn't outrun his past forever. With newfound resolve, he decided to return home, to the city he'd left behind in a desperate bid for survival. Upon his return, Giovanni found his family in grave danger, held captive by Enzo as pawns in his twisted game. A fierce battle ensued, a clash between the forces of darkness and the unwavering bonds of family. In a moment of intense drama, Giovanni confronted Enzo, their years of shared history and betrayal hanging heavy in the air. Their face-off was a masterclass in emotional storytelling, leaving viewers on the edge of their seats. Don't forget to subscribe for updates. Thanks for watching. See you next time.